It's almost like out of a spy novel. These are very dangerous, clandestine figures in Chinese intelligence, and there was a concerted effort to influence our elections.
Hi, Johnny. How are you? Good to see you. How you doing?
Well, every government, of course, has an interest in promoting itself abroad, to extending its soft power. I guess what's different about China is the way in which it's run through these clandestine operations. It's just not out there and open. It's out to silence dissent.
I think that this type of, frankly, naked influence buying is something which is damaging to Australia's political system.
The critical issue here is allowing a foreign government to influence your elections, and in this case, China is the biggest offender.
Welcome to Four Corners, I'm Chris Ullman. For 6 months, the world has watched the unfolding story of how the Russian government and its agents sought to subvert the US election and possibly help deliver the presidency to Donald Trump. Extraordinary though that story is, it's not unique. America's not the only democracy to have been targeted in this way, and Russia's not the only country accused of such subversion. Just 10 days ago, the head of Australia's peak intelligence agency, ASIO, warned that espionage and foreign interference are occurring here on an unprecedented scale, with the potential to cause serious harm to this nation's sovereignty, its security, and, he added, the integrity of our political system. Duncan Lewis didn't name the key suspect, but we can tonight: the Chinese Communist Party. A joint investigation by a team of journalists from Four Corners and Fairfax Media has exposed a concerted campaign by the Chinese government and its proxies to infiltrate the Australian political process to promote its own interests. Its targets include our universities, local student and community groups, the Chinese language media, and most disturbing of all, some of our nation's leading politicians. This investigation reveals that business leaders allied to Beijing are using millions in political donations to the major parties to buy access and influence, and in some cases to push policies that may be contrary to Australia's national interests. Nick McKenzie has the story.
In the early hours of a cold morning in October 2015, a team of counter-espionage officers breaks into a Canberra flat. Their target is a Chinese-born woman who is married to a former high-ranking Australian intelligence official. ASIO suspects the woman is involved in spying for the Chinese government.
For such an action to be taken, you would assume it would need the authorisation of the Attorney-General, it would need a warrant, and it would need essentially a decision involving many parts of the Australian national security community. So it would reflect deep and real concern about Chinese espionage in Australia.
The woman's name is Sherry Yan, a socialite with connections to the senior levels of government here and abroad. Did you think she might be a Chinese intelligence operative of some sort?
I understand that Sherry Yan is very closely connected with some of the most powerful and influential families and networks in China. Once you know that, you don't need to know much more.
Sherry Yan's husband, Roger Uren, was until 2001 Assistant Secretary at Australia's Office of National Assessments, the agency which provides secret intelligence briefings to the Prime Minister. During the raid, ASIO seized computers and documents. They discovered classified Australian government files on the work of Chinese intelligence. Uren is being investigated for the removal of these files, which may have been illegal.
This material is normally very tightly held. Presumably it relies on intelligence sources and methods which can't be compromised. It also could potentially reveal some of the deepest intelligence and analytical judgments of either Australia or indeed of Australia's allies and partners. So it's material that has to be protected at all costs.
In the weeks before the raid, ASIO analysts had been tracking links between political donors in Australia and the Chinese Communist Party. The donations provided access to the most powerful politicians in the land. ASIO chief Duncan Lewis was so worried, he organised meetings with the directors of the Liberal and National parties, as well as the Federal Secretary of the ALP, to warn them that the donors could compromise the major parties. How unusual is it for a Director General of ASIO to take such a step?
Oh, it's certainly unusual, and if that is indeed the case, it would reflect very real concern.
When he briefed the party officials, Duncan Lewis said the donors being examined by ASIO were breaking no laws, but he warned their strong connections to the Chinese Communist Party meant their donations might come with strings attached. ASIO also briefed then Prime Minister Tony Abbott.
I think that this type of, frankly, naked influence buying is something which is damaging to Australia's political system. I would far rather have a regime in place whereby we, the taxpayer, pay for the cost of our elections than relying on parties to get donations from foreign sources, wherever they may come from. But, you know, notably those foreign sources are primarily linked to Chinese business.
ASIO singled out 2 billionaire donors with especially close ties to the Chinese Communist Party. The first was enigmatic property developer Dr. Chow Chak-wing, a man who keeps a low profile, except when it comes to his big donations.
He sort of appeared out of nowhere. There's very little in his biography that predates his appearance and his entry onto the Australian and China business scene.
This is perhaps the most spectacular view, isn't it?
Dr. Chow's extraordinary generosity has given him access to Australia's political elite.
Well, may I congratulate you on your wonderful philanthropy in Australia.
Dr. Chow donated $20 million to build a Frank Gehry-designed building at the University of Technology, Sydney, which was opened by the Governor-General in 2015.
Well, you must be thrilled to see this come to fruition.
At the unveiling of the Dr. Chow Chak-wing building, the billionaire politely posed with the famous architect.
Can we get one more photo with Dr. Chow yourself?
Not content with having a building named after him, Dr. Chow splashed $70 million on Australia's most expensive home in 2015. A 6-storey mega mansion he bought from James Packer. Dr. Chow's money allowed him to regularly rub shoulders with the great and good of Australian politics. He's donated more than $4 million to the major parties over the past decade. The question ASIO has been probing is what he wants from his donations.
We don't know whether the donations are somehow driven or centrally encouraged by the Chinese Communist Party, or whether in fact you've got enthusiastic individuals freelancing to make donations that they think will resonate well when they report back to China, or if they report back to China, that these donations were made and that there's a change taking place in the Australian political discourse.
Dr. Chow is an Australian citizen. Back in his homeland, China, he was also a member of a Communist Party advisory group known as the People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC. This group carries out the work of an opaque lobbying arm of the party called the United Front Work Department.
We have to assume that individuals like that have really deep and serious connections to the Chinese Communist Party, and even if they're not receiving any kind of direction, they would feel some sense of obligation or indeed some desire to make the right impression on the powers that be in China, to demonstrate that they're being good members of the party, that they're pursuing the party's interests.
In a sense, you could say in Australia that with wealth comes responsibility, and that responsibility is to respond to the party when they ask you to do a favour for them.
Well, I think it's mainly to do with their own business interests in Australia. Also, it's very much in the nature of the way Chinese do business, making gifts. And most of these business developers and the sorts of people who are doing this, they crave the prestige and the status of being photographed standing next to politicians on both sides of politics. So it's about their influence and status and image, which they see as helping their business first and foremost, giving their family respect. It's very much a traditional Chinese way of operating.
Four Corners has learned ASIO's interest in Dr. Chow arose partly from his association with a woman described as an old friend, the socialite and lobbyist Sherry Yan. It was Sherry Yan who ASIO suspected of spying and whose Canberra apartment the agency raided.
Sherry Yan, or Yan Shui, is an Australian-Chinese businesswoman who's made her livelihood out of building connections between China and the outside world and acting as a go-between between sort of foreign businessmen, foreign government officials who are trying to get things done in China or find their way among the bureaucratic and political landmines that are there.
Dr. Chow used Sherry Yan as a consultant, somebody able to open up the right doors.
She's a very active person, and many people come through the place, through Beijing, and she's a dynamic, active person, speaks both languages perfectly, is charming, and comes from a well-connected background, which I don't know what those connections are. I only understand that's the case.
It appears her father was a PLA officer at one point in the very early days, so she's connected to sort of the core of the CCP, in a sense. And no one can really explain sort of where her sort of original money, original connections, her original ways of opening the doors in China comes from.
Sherry Yan divided her time between New York, Beijing and Canberra and moved with ease among the A-listers. Her contacts included high-flying businessman and Australia's former New York Consul General, Bill Scanlon. She was also close to the President of the United Nations General Assembly, John Ash.
You're having a fantastic day today. And say down day to Sherry. I don't have my...
Someone who knows how to work that landscape is useful not only for getting things done, not only for injecting Chinese perspectives into it, but also for being able to say, here are the players, here are the people who are important, here are their personal foibles.
As Sherry Yan relentlessly networked, her husband, Roger Uren, was often proudly by her side. Uren's previous work as a high-ranking Australian intelligence official with top security clearance meant he was trusted in Canberra. But not everyone trusted Sherry Yan.
In times past, I was advised to stay well clear of Sherry Yan.
Why?
I'm not entirely sure why. I was advised by an old friend in Australia's security establishment.
To stay clear of Sherry Yan.
To stay clear of Sherry Yan.
Good morning.
In October 2015, the Sherry Yan story took a sudden and dramatic twist in New York.
Today, together with our law enforcement partners, we expose yet another wide-ranging corruption scheme, one that is simultaneously local and global, and it is centered at the United Nations.
At the same time her Canberra apartment was being raided, Sherry Yan was arrested in the US, accused of bribing the UN General Assembly President. Yan's arrest stunned her associates, including former Australian Ambassador Jeff Raby.
Well, I was obviously very surprised. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. But she had been out of Beijing largely for a couple of years.
Minister, can I just ask if you're aware of Sherry Yin? She was arrested in the US last week over bribery allegations with the UN. She's a bit of a mystery. It seems that she lives here in Canberra, or at least maybe a dual citizen, but no one's quite sure. I just wonder whether you've got any... Is it a consular case?
I have been briefed on the matter. It's a matter that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is focusing on, but I'm not going to go into individual cases at this point, but it is a matter upon which I've been briefed.
Can you say if she's an Australian Chinese?
I'll leave that sort of detail to our consular staff. I've obviously been briefed on the matter, but it's a fairly complex issue. I don't want to compromise any of the investigations that are underway.
Right, thanks.
Thank you.
One of the events that led to Sherry Yan's arrest unfolded at the luxury Imperial Springs Resort, which is owned by none other than the Australian political donor, Dr. Chow Chak Wing. The FBI alleged Yan bribed the UN General Assembly President to speak at the resort at a conference hosted by Dr. Chow. A sealed indictment from a New York court against Sherry Yan refers to Dr. Chow using a code name, CC3. Sherry Yan was alleged to have told the UN President,
CC3's office emailed me the invitation. I will ask $200,000 for this trip.
A draft invitation sent to the United Nations President and allegedly approved by Dr. Chow stated his desire to make the UN chief his sincere friend in Guangdong province.
And your friend here has the pleasure to offer you a permanent convention venue for the UN meetings.
The UN President's bank account was then wired $200,000 by one of Dr. Chow's companies. Under US bribery law, it was illegal for Ash, as a UN official, to receive this payment. There is no suggestion Dr. Chow knew it was illegal.
At least some of the money that was moving through Sherry Yen, or that she was facilitating, came from him. And it doesn't mean that there was necessarily anything untoward about it, but just the fact of large amounts of money being moved or paid to people because of introductions or the activities of Sherry Yen make it somewhat suspect.
What are we trying to do is...
Sherry Yan pleaded guilty to bribery charges and was jailed last year. Dr. Chow has never been charged with any offence and denies any wrongdoing. ASIO's interest in Sherry Yan is just one of many suspected foreign interference and intelligence cases being probed by Australian agencies, and which lead back to Beijing.
It's fair to say that agencies like ASIO are really quite alive and alert to these issues. The challenge for them is that their mandate is essentially to monitor and to report to government what's happening. They don't have a mandate, and it's not clear who within the Australian system has a mandate to act on this information.
In Washington, concerns about the Chinese Communist Party interfering in Australian politics is growing. There, senior officials believe Australia is open to compromise, including through foreign donations.
Well, you know, in the United States, we prohibit that expressly. I think there's a reason for that. We don't want the influence of foreign money in our elections and foreign governments to influence our elections. I think that's a wise policy. Quite frankly, I was a bit surprised that Australia does allow foreign contributions. And if you look at the numbers, which I was privy to, a lot of these donations are coming from China. China has a very strong influence in the region. They want to influence Australia. They want a stronger presence in Australia. And what better way to do that than to influence political figures through foreign contributions?
Republican Congressman Mike McCall is chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. In the 1990s, while a prosecutor at the US Justice Department, he investigated a scandal known as Chinagate. Chinese spies funneled donations into the Clinton presidential campaign.
Hi, Johnny. How are you? Good to see you. How you doing?
It's almost like I have a spy novel. I mean, it's the most interesting case I ever prosecuted. These are very dangerous clandestine figures in Chinese intelligence, and there was a concerted effort to influence our elections.
McCall warns Australia is badly exposed unless our laws are changed.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The critical issue here is allowing a foreign government to influence your elections. I think at a minimum, closing off foreign contributions from a foreign government to influence elections, and in this case, China, is the biggest offender.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit here in March came as Australia grapples with a shifting world order post the election of Donald Trump and an emboldened Chinese Communist Party no longer content to hide its strength and bide its time. In Australia's diplomatic and security community, debate is raging about why and to what extent the one-party state is seeking influence in Australian institutions. In Canberra, local students were bussed in by the Chinese embassy to welcome Premier Li. The young patriots drown out those there to protest against the Chinese government. Lu Pen Lu is president of the Chinese Students' Association at the University of Canberra. She organised 200 of her classmates for the rally.
Chinese embassy, they support us or sponsor us by providing flags, food.
The flags?
Yeah.
The food?
Transportation.
Transportation.
And like legal help as well, lawyer.
For the event, for the day?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's politics involved. Sometimes there may be conflicts with the police.
The Chinese government and its proxies monitor Chinese student associations at most Australian universities. This oversight has a dark side. Students organising anti-Communist Party protests may be reported to the Chinese embassy.
I guess as the president of Chinese Student Scholar Association and as a Chinese, I would do this for the safety of all the members, all the students.
You would tell the embassy that some students were organising a human rights protest, for instance?
Yes, I would, definitely. Just to keep all the students safe and to do it for China as well.
Brisbane student and democracy activist Anthony Chang believes he is being monitored by the Chinese government. He fled China 3 years ago after he was arrested and interrogated for putting up posters supporting independence for Taiwan.
When they took me to the police station, I was still frightened. I had my hands over my head, and I said, I will absolutely obey you. Just make sure you don't shoot me. As you can see, I was scared of them.
He didn't expect to come to the attention of the Chinese authorities here too. But after he spoke in Brisbane at this pro-Hong Kong democracy rally, his parents back in China were visited by state security officials who demanded their son cease his Australian activism.
My parents are very worried. They're worried that it might affect them. For example, their work. They could lose their job. They could go to jail because of my activities.
One of the fiercest critics of Communist Party interference in Australia is Sydney academic Dr. Feng Chongyi. While Premier Lee was being feted in Australia, Dr. Feng was back in China to meet with human rights lawyers, work he knew would draw attention.
We know that's an open secret that our telephone is tapped. We are followed everywhere, but that is a routine that we have to accept if we want to work in China.
But Dr. Feng did not expect what happened next. At his hotel in the city of Kunming, he was tracked down by agents from the Ministry of State Security. Over the next 10 days, he was subjected to intensive videotaped questioning for up to 6 hours a day. Many of the questions involved his activities in Sydney. They wanted to know about your democracy activism in Sydney?
In Sydney, yeah, that's right.
They wanted to know about your associates in Sydney?
That's right.
They knew about your family in Sydney?
That's right.
They knew specific details about names?
Actually, for my family members, they got everything. They got everything.
Dr. Feng was accused of endangering state security. Only after the intervention of the Turnbull government was he told he was finally free to return home to Sydney. He believes he was targeted by the Chinese Communist Party as a warning to others in Australia not to challenge the party.
There are several messages they are sending. One being directly related to my work is that the academics better to stay away from sensitive issues or sensitive topic. Otherwise, they can get you into deep trouble, detention, or other punishment.
While Dr. Feng was trapped in China, back in Australia, Premier Lee was the guest of honour at a Chinese community event held at the Sydney Town Hall. Sitting at the head table opposite Premier Lee was Dr. Chow Chak-wing. A couple of seats over from him was another Chinese billionaire, Huang Qiangmo. Like Dr. Chow, Mr. Huang has come to the attention of ASIO. Mr. Huang is the second donor named by ASIO in its secret warning to the Coalition and Labor about the danger of Chinese Communist Party interference in Australian politics.
When we look at other business people contributing, say, to Australian political parties, we can go back through the company records and establish where that money came from. In the case of Mr. Huang, it's not quite so clear.
Mr. Huang's rise is a classic rags to riches story. From a poor rural family, he built his billion-dollar fortune as a property developer in provincial China. Mr. Huang arrived in Australia in 2011 in near total obscurity, but that didn't last for long.
How about we thank Mr. Huang with 3 cheers for his generosity today. Hip hip, hip hip, hip hip.
Mr. Huang and his property development firm Yuhu began donating millions of dollars to health and education initiatives, earning the praise of politicians from both parties.
I thought I'd just say a couple of words about Mr. Huang. I think it's important to get a sense of the man. He is a man of many dimensions from what I've already been able to determine. He's a very thoughtful, cerebral fellow. He's a man who thinks about life and about how we can improve it. He's a man comfortable in his own skin. He's a man with a sense of humour, which is a good thing. He's a visionary.
Mr. Huang became a major political donor too. Getting to know Tony Abbott, he gave $770,000 to the Liberals before the 2013 election. A big chunk of that went to Julie Bishop's home state of Western Australia. Mr Huang and his associates also gave to the Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, $100,000 to his campaign fundraising vehicle, as Robb signed off on the China-Australia free trade deal. And $1.8 million went towards an Australia-China Research Institute. Mr Huang became its chairman. Its director, former Foreign Minister Bob Carr.
First, he's seeking to establish his position, his status in the Chinese-Australian community. Secondly, I think he's trying to secure some standing for the Chinese-Australian community with various Australian governments at state and federal level. And third, through those community organisations, to secure outcomes that are favourable to Chinese state policy.
In the right company, Mr Huang makes no secret of his devotion to the Chinese Communist Party. At an event celebrating 66 years of one-party rule in China, Mr Huang took to the stage.
We overseas Chinese unswervingly support the Chinese government's decision to defend our nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We support the development of the motherland always and take on an important role in building One Belt, One Road.
Mr Huang oversees a Communist Party-aligned council which supports Beijing's territorial claims over Taiwan, Hong Kong and the South China Sea. It's called the Australian Council for the Promotion of the Peaceful Reunification of China, and Mr Huang is president.
That means he is a key member, supported by the Chinese authorities, including the embassy or the consulate here. That, as I said, is the most influential organization or association in the Chinese diaspora community in Australia. Whoever took the position as the head of that organization means he can be identified as the leader of the most influential figure within the Chinese community, enjoy very high status.
Mr Huang's council is dedicated to pushing the Communist Party's interests in China and abroad.
Well, every government, of course, has an interest in promoting itself abroad, to extending its soft power. I guess what's different about China is the way in which it's run through these clandestine operations. It's just not out there and open. Secondly, it's really not out to win an argument. It's out to silence dissent. And other countries generally don't operate that way. They expect to win an argument on its strengths, not to silence all opposition. The way the Chinese government or party, through the United Front Department and the Overseas Chinese Bureau operates, is effectively to control and silence dissent.
Mr Huang chaperoned the top Communist Party official in charge of overseas Chinese, and who was accompanying Premier Li on his Australian visit. Mr Huang has made something of an art form of juggling his Chinese Communist Party ties with his cultivation of Australian political figures.
Obviously, he have two identities. One, of course, is a businessman, quite smart businessman. Again, the other identity, he's trying to be a political figure. He does have his own political ambition.
One of Mr Huang's advisors on the Peaceful Reunification Council is New South Wales Labor politician Ernest Wong. A close ally and friend, the pair travelled to Taiwan together on Reunification Council business. In November 2012, Mr Huang and two other Reunification Council members donated $500,000 to the New South Wales ALP. 6 months later, the ALP put Ernest Wong into the New South Wales Upper House seat, formerly held by Labor's Eric Roosendahl. Roosendahl went on to get a job with Mr. Huang.
Well, Mr. Huang was very generous to all parties. He could hardly be called partisan. He contributes to the Liberal Party as well as to the Labor Party. He's also a very generous employer of former party operatives.
Another of Mr. Huang's political allies and a fellow member of the Peaceful Reunification Council is active ALP identity Simon Joe. Joe was given the last place on the Labor Party's Senate ticket at last year's election, a month after two of his business associates donated $60,000 to the ALP. Mr. Huang was at the announcement.
As China's power keeps rising, the status of overseas Chinese is also rising. Now, overseas Chinese realise that they need to make their voices heard in politics to safeguard Chinese interests and let Australian society pay more attention to the Chinese. This is a very good thing.
Within Labor, Sam Dastyari was Mr. Huang's key contact. As the party's New South Wales General Secretary and then as a senator, Dastyari has welcomed hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations from Mr. Huang.
Demonstration, Mr. Huang, of how highly you're respected, how much all of us respect you and the work you do.
An incident that occurred in June 2016 leaves little doubt that Mr. Huang expects something in return for his donations. In the lead-up to the federal election, he promised the ALP $400,000 in donations. But then, at the National Press Club, Labor's defence spokesman Stephen Conroy criticised Beijing over its land grabs in the South China Sea, flagging the ALP would take a more aggressive approach in the disputed territory.
Now, when it comes to regional security challenges, like the South China Sea, the Turnbull government has hidden behind ambiguous language while refusing to be upfront with the Australian people. By contrast, we believe our Defence Force should be authorised to conduct freedom of navigation operations consistent with international law. And while
After this speech, Mr. Huang reacted decisively to the apparent attack on one of the Chinese Communist Party's core policies. Four Corners has learned that Mr. Huang called the ALP and told them that because of Conroy's comments, he was cancelling his promised $400,000 donation.
It's precisely the kind of example of economic inducement being turned into economic leverage or coercion. In other words, it's a classic example of a benefit being provided but then withheld as a way of punishment and as a way of influencing Australian policy independence.
Just one day after Stephen Conroy's comments, Mr. Huang appeared at a press conference alongside his Labor mate. Contradicting his party's position, Senator Dastyari told the Chinese media that Australia shouldn't meddle with China's activities in the South China Sea. When his comments were reported several weeks later, he tried to explain.
Why did you
Andrew.
hold that press conference and make those comments on the South China Sea?
Okay, so this is a separate matter, and I don't want to get to this.
Or is it a separate matter?
I support the Labor Party position on the South China Sea. I support the Labor Party position. I support an international rules-based system with international norms where the rule of law is applied. Now, that has been my position. That remains my position. That is the Labor Party position on the issue of the South China Sea.
It wasn't in that press conference.
Look. Now, while I can't be held directly to words that were held at a press conference that I don't have a transcription of in front of me. Let me be clear. I support the Labor Party position on this issue. No, Andrew.
Amid the media storm, the press seized on Mr. Huang's previous payment of $5,000 to Senator Dastyari to pay an ALP legal bill. Another Chinese donor had given him $1,600 for a travel bill. The senator fell on his sword.
So look, I'm going to be making a short statement and I won't be taking any questions. This has been a difficult week, and this afternoon I've made a difficult decision. Today I spoke to my leader, Bill Shorten, and offered my resignation from the front bench, which he accepted.
Last year, Mr. Huang sought more political help. He had applied for Australian citizenship, but his application had stalled. It was being secretly scrutinised by ASIO. Mr. Huang began lobbying his political contacts for assistance. Four Corners has learned of one politician who agreed to help, Labor Senator Sam Dastyari. Four Corners can reveal that after multiple requests from the billionaire donor, Dastyari's office contacted the Immigration Department to query the progress of Mr. Huang's citizenship application. In the lead up to the election, Dastyari's office made 4 separate approaches to the department. It's understood Dastyari made 2 of these calls himself. Four Corners has made several requests to Mr. Huang for an interview. He's declined. Nevertheless, we caught up with him in Sydney.
ABC Four Corners, we'd like to ask you about your relationship to the Chinese Communist Party.
我们就想问你一些问题，我们就想问你的关系跟中国的共产党。
我没有这个关系。
Why have you asked Australian politicians to help you get a passport?
你为什么问就是澳大利亚的政治蛋盘，就是帮你弄一个身份，澳大利亚的身份？
这我不回答这个问题。
In a statement, Mr. Huang said he took strong objection to any suggestion it linked his donations to any foreign policy outcome. Mr. Huang's citizenship application is still being reviewed by ASIO. The signing of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement cemented our vital relationship with the world's new economic superpower. As Trade Minister, Andrew Robb spent years negotiating the deal. His position brought him in contact with another Chinese billionaire, Ye Cheng, head of the Landbridge Group.
Investment agreement between Landbridge Group and Westside Corporation Limited.
Landbridge recently spent $506 million to secure a 99-year lease for the Port of Darwin, a hugely controversial deal in light of the company's close ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
I think Chinese companies understand that if they can actually help to satisfy the strategic and political objectives of the Communist Party, that will ensure their prosperity. It will give them access to cheap finance. And it's something which makes the senior leadership of those firms more prominent and successful in the context of Beijing politics.
The Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Before last year's election, Andrew Robb stepped down from government and his final senior position as Australia's Special Envoy on Trade. A few months later, it was revealed he'd been appointed as an economic advisor to Landbridge.
And what about your own role at Landbridge? Because the Prime Minister said he hadn't been notified about...
No, why should I? He said to me, why he...
Well, we've got the Australian Defence Association...
I'm sorry, I've now left politics, right?
We've got the Australian Defence Association and the opposition jumping up and down about...
They're all playing politics.
Questions about ministerial conduct and all that sort of thing.
Again, they're implying that I will act unethically, and where's the evidence? I mean, I've been a senior cabinet minister. I know the responsibilities that I've got. I've got no intention of breaching those responsibilities.
Andrew Robb's confidential consulting deal can now be revealed. Robb was on the Landbridge payroll from July 1, the day before the election. From that date, he's been paid $73,000 a month, or $880,000 a year, plus expenses. Andrew Robb declined an interview, but told Four Corners he's acted in line with his obligations as former Trade Minister.
I respect, as the Prime Minister said, Mr Robb has a right to go out and earn a living once he's left Parliament. But, he was a Cabinet Minister for many years, and I think now providing advice to the leadership of the Landbridge Group was possibly a step too far, too quickly in terms of his departure from politics.
Questions around how Australia and its leaders manage the relationship with China are central to the nation's most important foreign policy debate. Australia must maintain its growing ties to its most important economic partner. But we must also confront the fact that some of the interests and practices of the authoritarian one-party state conflict with our own.
There's an awareness of a problem, but the agencies themselves don't have the mandate or the wherewithal to manage the problem. All they can do is sound the alarm and alert the political class. The political class needs to take a set of decisions in the interests of Australian sovereignty, in the interests of Australia's independence of policy making, to restrict and limit foreign influence in Australian decision making.
After being briefed on the Four Corners Fairfax investigation, the Attorney-General sent us a statement revealing the Prime Minister has asked him to conduct a major inquiry into Australia's espionage and foreign interference laws. Senator Brandis said the threat of political interference by foreign intelligence services is a problem of the highest order, and it's getting worse. Senator Brandis says he'll examine whether the espionage offences in the Criminal Code are adequate, and expects to brief Cabinet on possible changes to the law before the end of the year. We'll watch with interest. Good night.
If you'd like more information about tonight's program, go to abc.net.au/4corners.